Hello, and welcome to our 18th lesson in our Judges series. I'm going to warn you up front. This is an adult story. This is a gruesome, this is a tough, this is a very difficult story. And so just be aware of that as we move into this story. This is a challenging story for our senses, for our sensibilities, for our humanity, if you will. And so I just want to give you that warning up front. This is an adult story. This is a mature story. But before we begin that, let's go ahead and open with some prayer. Most gracious and loving God, watch over us this day. Give us wisdom and insight to help us understand this story to us and what it means to us. How this story can be interpreted and understood in our modern day. In all that we do, watch over us and guide us in wisdom and insight. And we thank you for all that you do for us. Amen. That little scratching noise was one of my cats on the chair here. Well, we'll see how that goes. Well, as we begin our story today, again, I've warned you that this is a mature story, and I'm serious about that. This is a very mature story. As we begin into this is a horrific story. What this story demonstrates, though, is this demonstrates the change that has occurred in the people. This is a change that has occurred in their culture and the society. This is what happens when human beings do what they see right for their own lives without seeing what is right for the other life, for the other person, for the other human being in their life, the other people affected by this. The story also shows how far a people can go from into lawlessness, into anarchy. How far they can go into depravity, into the illness of society, and play into those illnesses that develop in society. There are also, this is what they also call a mirror story. In many ways, this is a mirror story of two other stories. This is a mirror story of the Sodom and Gomorrah story. And this is also a mirror story of the development of the kingship of Saul and David. Though those characters, those people and the places and the events that occur in this story are reflective of what happens in other stories. And that's why they're called mirror stories, because they reflect other stories in them. This story here reflects a story that happened during Abraham's time, prior to this period. And it also reflects or mirrors story reflects the story or the times that are in the not too distant future. So this mirror story has two mirrors, one pointing back and one pointing forward into the future. And so we need to recognize that also. And I will point when we're seeing the reflection of those other stories. But mostly they'll be obvious to you. I think the ones that will probably be less obvious to you would be the ones that reflect the Saul and David story. So again, I will point those out as we move into those things. This story also reflects the degrading and the lessening of the status of women in their culture. What that also reflects is when the most vulnerable in your society become the most abused in your society is broken. And that's what this story also is trying to reflect to us, is their culture, their society, their people are broken. What holds them together is broken. Maybe in some ways that is reflective of our own times, but that's something that we'll have to interpret on our own. I don't want to reflect into that. So let's begin our story today. This is Judges chapter 19, beginning with verse 1. In those days, when there was no king in Israel, a certain Levite, residing in the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim, took to himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. But his concubine became angry with him, and she went away from him to her father's house at Bethlehem in Judah, and was there some 4 months. Then her husband set out after her, to speak tenderly to her, and bring her back. He had with him his servant and a couple of donkeys. When he reached her father's house, the girl's father saw him and came with joy to meet him. His father-in-law, the girl's father, made him stay, and he remained with him 3 days. So they ate and drank, and he stayed there. On the 4th day, they got up early in the morning, and he prepared to go. But the girl's father said to his son-in-law, "Fortify yourself with a bit of food, and after that you may go." So the 2 men sat and ate and drank together. And the girl's father said to the man, "Why not spend the night and enjoy yourself?" When the man got up to go, his father-in-law kept urging him until he spent the night there again. On the 4th day he got up early in the morning to leave, and the girl's father said, "Fortify yourself." So they lingered until the day declined, and the 2 of them ate and drank. When the man with his concubine and his servant got up to leave, his father-in-law, the girl's father, said to him, "Look, the day has worn on until it's almost evening. Spend the night. See, the day has drawn to a close. Spend the night here and enjoy yourself. Tomorrow you can get up early in the morning for your journey and go home." So as our story today begins, incidentally, just as another part of this story lasts until the end of the book of Judges. This is our final story in the book of Judges, and it is a 3-part story. So here is the first part that we're reading today. Next week will be part 2, and then last week will be the 3rd week, or 2 weeks from now will be the last and final lesson out of our book of Judges. So as our story begins today, we have the catchphrase that is part of this whole series that began in chapter 17, although the theme of doing what is right in their own eyes runs entirely through the book of Judges. It starts all the way back at the very beginning with people doing as they thought was right in their own eyes, or doing things that they saw in their eye, and doing those things regardless of the consequences. So the theme is right there at the top of the story, and this is, again, whenever we see that statement, in those days there was no king in Israel, that's also a transition to a new story. But as the rest of Judges shows, that story, although it's a transition to a new story, a lot of the scenery, the places, and the where the stories take place, some of the names that pop up, are part of the continuing theme. And so we'll see that as we go forward. So we see here again, we're going to address another Levite, just like the previous Levite. This Levite, the previous Levite was living in Judah, in Bethlehem, and he travels north, and that's where his adventures start or go. Here is a Levite who lives in the north country, up in the northern part of Ephraim, and he is traveling, and he travels down, as we move through the story, we see he travels down to the same place where that other Levite left from to go move north. This Levite is not moving south, but he goes south to Bethlehem, where he to contact or to reestablish relationships with his concubine wife, his second wife. So he lives in the northern hill country of Ephraim, and he has a wife from Bethlehem down in Judah. See, so these two stories, the previous Levite and this Levite, the stories are reversed. However, they are still very similar, and so you see how the connection here continues to flow through this. That these stories are connected in that way. And he has this second wife, or this lesser wife, that he got from Bethlehem. It is interesting throughout the story that his first wife, or his, what we suppose, I guess, would be his first wife, or his main wife, his true wife, is never mentioned in the story. And so we're not privy to that information. We also have no names in this. As you'll note here, nobody here is named all through this story. So that's another key aspect of this. It's gotten to the point where, if you remember going all the way back to the first couple of chapters, and then the first stories and everything, everybody had a name, a little history, and so forth. And these stories here, and again, those people were more in connection with God than here toward the end of the stories. These stories where God seems to be distant from the stories. So he's got this wife, and she's from Bethlehem in Judah. There's a little bit of I'm not going to say confusion, but there's a little bit of ambiguity about the reason why the wife leaves. It depends on which translation you read also. Here in this one, his concubine becomes angry with him, and she goes back to her father's house. That's the passage I read here. The other translation, the Jewish translation from the Torah or from the Tanakh, the Jewish Bible, has this as she has left because of infidelity. And she's gone back to her own home because there was a spat there at the house, and maybe she was accused of being having an affair or having a relationship with somebody outside of her marriage to our Levite lead character. So there's a couple of different ways to view this. I'm kind of going with, they had a serious spat. They had a real argument about something. And it may have been over her virginity or her relationship with somebody else. And again, that's kind of hinted at in the story, but it's not made very clear. So, regardless of the reason, she leaves, and she heads back down to her father's house down in Bethlehem. 4 months go by, and again, here this also plays into the possibility of there being an accusation of infidelity, because it would take 3 to 4 months for you to know for sure whether the concubine, whether his second wife here was pregnant or not. And so this could be part of that. She better not be pregnant. She's supposed to be a virgin. She's supposed to be my wife. She better not be pregnant. So that's a possibility for why the 4 months elapse before the husband goes out after her. But 4 months elapse where she's down there, and we see here that he sets out after her to speak tenderly to her and bring her back. So maybe this was just an argument, and he wants her back, regardless of whatever. Maybe it was infidelity, and and they had this argument, and they had this disagreement, and she was angry, and she went back down there. 4 months have elapsed. She's proven to him she's not pregnant, so she must be innocent of whatever it is that he thinks it is, and he's going down there to make up for this. He apparently does want her back at this moment. Of course, we're not really truly given his motivations other than to speak tenderly to her, to speak kindly to her. That doesn't necessarily mean that's what he is inside, but that is maybe the front that he wants to put forward, that he's not angry. We're not really sure. Again, the father-in-law's actions in this kind of throws some curiosity into that. Is the Levite coming back really just to get he's making a face, but he's going to get his concubine wife back, and then he's going to take her back and punish her. Maybe that's also what's going through the father-in-law's mind for his daughter as this story progresses, or as he plays out his part. But again, he's also showing the father-in-law. Well, let's get back to the story here. So he sets out after her to speak kindly to her and bring her back. He has with him a servant and a couple of donkeys, which means he's also preparing to bring her back, because he brought a donkey for her to ride back on, along with goods and all the supplies and everything he needs, his fodder and all that stuff for his donkeys and so forth. Well, he gets to the father-in-law's house, or to the girl's father's house, And the father-in-law, the girl's father, sees him, welcomes him in joyfully. Apparently, the father-in-law truly wants this marriage to work. He wants this to continue forward. We kind of get we get the very serious impression that the father really wants to make amends to his son-in-law, this Levite priest. Also, the fact that the Levite has a couple of donkeys indicates, a servant and a couple of donkeys indicates he's got a little wealth also. So there could be that also, that the father-in-law doesn't want to lose this wealthy son-in-law over whatever this infraction or this difficulty is. So the father-in-law sees him, and he comes out with joy to meet him, and he brings him into his house and has him stay there with him for 3 days. And apparently this is as far as the son-in-law wants to go. The Levite, he's ready to go home after 3 days, and he gets ready in the morning to get up, and he prepares to go. But the father-in-law, again, maybe he's trying to make further amends with his son-in-law. Maybe he is just showing the extreme hospitality that we are supposed to understand is happening here. We again have a contrast in this story that as we read forward, we're going to have a contrast between hospitality and inhospitality as we move forward. So just be aware of that also, that part of the story has to deal with that hospitality aspect that is prevalent throughout the whole of the Old Testament, of the of our Hebrew text. Hospitality is important all through our Hebrew text. In this story here, the father-in-law is showing extreme hospitality in Bethlehem. And again, Bethlehem will be explained here as to why Bethlehem. This is the city of David. This is Bethlehem where Jesus was born. This is that Bethlehem in Judah. So the son-in-law stays there 3 days. They ate and they drink. Again, the wording here, they ate and they drank, is actually a Hebrew word or an Aramaic word or an ancient word that means a festival, or drinking is important to this. This is it's not a drinking festival, but it is drink is heavily laden in the story here, that there's drinking involved. Well, he stays there. On the 4th day, the next morning, he gets up, he's getting ready to go, and his father-in-law says, "No, stay a little longer here. You need to fortify yourself with a bit of food before you go, and after you eat, then you can go." So the two men, they sat down again, they start eating and drinking, and again, drinking is prevalent in the wording of this in the original. So they ate and they drink together, and the father-in-law, the girl's father, says to the Levite again, "Why not spend another night and enjoy yourself here?" The man wasn't ready to do that. He really wanted to get on the road. He starts to get up, and the father-in-law really urges him to spend one more night. And so the man gives in, and he stays another night. 5th day comes around, and it's early in the morning. The Levite gets up and gets ready to go. And again, the girl's father says, "Fortify yourself and hang around." Well, they hung out together. They lingered away until the day declined. It was well into the late afternoon, where they were eating and drinking. And the man gets up with his servant, with his concubine, and they get up to leave. And his father says, "Look, really, the day's really long, and it's almost worn out. It's worn on until it's almost evening." This is, he's indicating a time that's late in the afternoon. It is too late for you to leave and actually make it to a safe place. Spend the night here and enjoy yourself one more night, and then tomorrow you can get up early in the morning and go on home. So again, the father-in-law is trying to show extreme hospitality one more time, one more night. Continuing on with verse 10. But the man would not spend the night. He got up and departed, and arrived opposite Jebus, that is Jerusalem. He had with him a couple of saddled donkeys, and his concubine was with him. When they were near Jebus, the day was far spent, and the servant said to his master, "Come now, let us turn aside to this city of the Jebusites, and spend the night in it." But his master said to him, we will not turn aside into a city of foreigners who do not belong to the people of Israel, but we will continue on to Gibeah. Then he said to his servant, Come, let us try to reach one of these places and spend the night at Gibeah or at Ramah. So they passed on and went their way, and the sun went down on them near Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. They turned aside there to go in and spend the night at Gibeah. He went in and sat down in the open square of the city, but no one took him in to spend the night. Well, so our Levite friend here, he is not ready to spend another night at the father-in-law's house. Instead, he's ready to get up and go. And so he gets up and departs, even though it is late in the evening or late in the afternoon, and it's really too late for that he should actually be traveling. He should have stayed one more night. He arrives near Jebus. And our little parenthetical note is that it says that is Jerusalem. Okay, so a little history lesson here. When Joshua delegated out the land or allotted out the land to the 12 tribes, to the 12 sons or grandsons of Jacob, the territory of Benjamin, which is where Jerusalem is. Jerusalem, as we know it today, at the time, Jerusalem was known as Jerusalem. In reality, the name goes back to at least 2000 BC. There's a record of the name Jerusalem on a record, and so that was the name of this town. When it was allotted, when that town was in the territory that was allotted to Benjamin, well, as they invaded into the territories, into the Canaanite lands, as Judah was heading toward its territory south of Benjamin's territory, they ran into Jerusalem. And they conquered, the tribe of Judah actually conquered Jerusalem and took the city and left it empty because it wasn't in their territory, and they moved on into their own territory. Well, in the meantime, before Benjamin could move into the area and take the city that Judah had conquered, before the Benjamites could take that city, a small tribe of Canaanites, people who lived in the area called the Jebusites, moved into the city and took it and controlled the city. Jerusalem was not a huge city at the time. It was a good sized city. It was a good sized town, but it wasn't the metropolis Jerusalem that it becomes. It was a very small town on one hill, and on the other hill was the threshing floor for Jebus. This is where they brought the grain for the town of Jebus, which was sitting on this hill. So they come to this place, which in the future, which is Jerusalem, but while the Jebusites are living there during this period of time, it is called Jebus. So they renamed it to Jebus. And the parenthetical note is to remind us that its real name is Jerusalem, but the people that are living there at the time call it Jebus. Later, this is the same Jebus that is conquered by David and returned to the name of Jerusalem and so forth. And so that's where this story fits into the future in this here. So, the story continues on that he had with him a couple of saddled donkeys, and his concubine was with him along with his servant, and so all these people there were with him. And when they were near Jebus, and the day was really almost over, it was far spent. That means that it was really close to sundown. His servant turns to him and says, "Let's go and we'll turn here, and let's go ahead and we'll stay in the city of Jebus, the city of the Jebusites. We'll stay here in Jebus, and that's where we'll spend the night." But the Levite wouldn't have that, because Jebus is owned by foreigners. They're Canaanites. They're not part of the family of Israel. They're not one of Jacob's sons, and so he's not wanting to go there. He's maybe fearful that their customs would be different, and he wouldn't understand, or he would get in trouble, or he'd be fearful that they wouldn't treat him well. Interestingly enough, they probably would have treated him very well, because this hospitality thing isn't just Israelite. This was part of the Canaanite philosophy, part of the Canaanite cultural norms. This was part of everybody that lived in the region, with maybe the exception of the Philistines. Hospitality is part of the tradition and part of the culture. And so even the Jebusites would have shown hospitality to him, but he doesn't want to stay in a foreign city, a city owned by foreigners, that doesn't belong to the people of Israel. So he says, we will continue on to Gibeah. So come on, let's try to reach one of these other places, he tells his servant, and we'll spend the night either at Gibeah, or maybe we can even make it to Ramah. Gibeah. Okay, so this Levite has picked up his concubine in the city of David, which is Bethlehem, and now he's going to spend the night in the city of Gibeah. Now here is where the mirror starts to become more obvious. Gibeah is the hometown, the birth town of Saul, the first king in Israel. And Saul, well, the first king in Israel that was actually called a king. There was a couple of wannabe kings that we've met in Judges here, but this is the first one that is called a king by God, by the prophets, and by the people, is Saul. And Saul's hometown is Gibeah. So, the Levite left the town of Bethlehem, the city of David, and he's traveled to Gibeah, the city of Saul. The sun goes down on them as they come close to Gibeah, and so they decide that that's where they're going to stay. And we discover here that it belongs to Benjamin. So Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin, owns the town of Gibeah, where the Levite is planning to stay. So they turn aside and they go in to spend the night in Gibeah. And he goes into the open square, which is in the city, and no one is taking him in. This is an important aspect of the story. Again, here's that hospitality part of this story, is that he's come to this town, Gibeah, a Israelite town, tribe of Benjamin, and he's gone to the central square, which is, again, where a traveler would go. So he goes to the central square there, and what normally would happen is that somebody from the village, from the town, as they were passing by the central square, which would be near the market, this would be a place where if you're in the town, then you would travel through this area. They would see him, and he's a foreigner. He is someone that is on the move. He's a traveler. They would, out of the hospitality rules, would invite him to their home. Somebody would take them in, and it doesn't appear that anybody's doing that as this story continues. Moving on now with verse 16. Then at evening there was an old man coming from his work in the field. The man was from the hill country of Ephraim, and he was residing in Gibeah. The people of the place were Benjamites. When the old man looked up and saw the wayfarer in the open square of the city, he said, "Where are you going, and where do you come from?" He answered him, "We are passing from Bethlehem in Judah to the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim, from which I come. I went to Bethlehem in Judah, and I'm going to my home. Nobody has offered to take me in. We, your servants, have straw and fodder for our donkeys, with bread and wine for me and the woman, and the young man along with us. We need nothing more." The old man said, "Peace be to you. I will care for all your wants. Only do not spend the night in the square." So he brought him into his house and fed the donkeys. They washed their feet and ate and drank. So then, he arrives in the town. He's in the central square looking for, in fact, it sounds like as the story progresses here, he's gone, all right, fine. Nobody's going to invite me to their home, so I will spend the night here in the central square. I've got everything I need. Well, as the evening comes on here, as it gets darker at the evening here, it's getting dark. The old man, there's an old man, and he apparently either works out in the field. He works out in the field. He doesn't own the field. What we need to recognize is this is another man who is displaced from his tribal territories, which means he cannot own anything in Gibeah. He's a worker. He's an old man, but he works for a living. He works for somebody else. He has a residence, but again, he won't own that residence. He'll be leasing it or renting it from somebody else who would be the landowner, because he is not allowed to own anything here in this town because he is an Ephraimite living in Benjamin territory. Again, there's interesting here is that this is a Levite who lives in Ephraim, and he meets a Ephraimite living in Benjamin territory, and this is where the hospitality comes from. So the old man looks up at him and he sees the traveler, the wayfarer, the Levite in the open square of the city, and he says to him, "Where are you going and where do you come from?" Again, here are hospitality questions. Get to know the man a little bit. He no longer is a stranger, he's now a friend, and you invite a friend to your home. He responds to him, "We're passing from Bethlehem to Judah, to the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim, from which I come, and I went to Bethlehem and in Judah, and I'm now going to my home. And nobody has offered to take me in. We have everything we need. Me and my servants, we have straw, we have fodder for the donkeys, we've got bread, we've got wine. Me and the woman and my servant along here with us, we have nothing more we need." So, he tells the man who he is, where he's coming from, where he's going, what his itinerary is, what he's planning on doing, and the old man then. And then he also explains to the old man that he has everything he needs. He just doesn't have any wants or needs where he's at. It's all good. Well, the old man says, "Well, peace be with you, shalom. But I will care for all of your wants. Only, I will care for everything that you need. Only please don't spend the night here in the square." So he brings him to his house and he feeds his donkeys, and he washes their feet, and they eat and they drink. Good hospitality. It is, I don't know if you've seen it yet, but we do have a similarity from a previous story. This is the mirror is beginning to reflect that previous story, and that's the story of Sodom. The story of Sodom. So be keeping that in mind as we've started to see the reflection of the Saul and David story with Bethlehem and Gibeah. We're now seeing the reflection of the Sodom story with the lack of hospitality of the Benjamites here in this town of Gibeah, that it's actually a foreigner that invites the man into their home. Again, the mirror to the Lot and Sodom story is that Lot was a foreigner residing in that town, just like this old man is, who invites the two strangers to come and live in his house. Here the old man comes and invites him to stay in his house. So here's the mirror is beginning to reflect. Keep that in mind as we move forward. Picking up now with verse 22. Well, here, before I do that, here is where the story this is where the maturity part of the story begins. This is the difficult part of the story. And so hang in with me in this as we move into this really, truly tragic and horrible story. Picking up now with verse 22. While they were enjoying themselves, the men of the city, a perverse lot, surrounded the house and started pounding on the door. They said to the old man, the master of the house, "Bring out the man who came into your house, so that we may know him." And the man, the master of the house, went out to them and said to them, No, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Since this man is my guest, do not do this vile thing. Here are my virgin daughter and his concubine. Let me bring them out now. Ravish them, and do whatever you want to them. But against this man do not do such a vile thing. But the men would not listen to him. So the man seized his concubine and put her out to them. They wantonly raped her and abused her all through the night until the morning. And as the dawn began to break, they let her go. As morning appeared, the woman came and fell down at the door of the man's house where her master was until it was light. So again, here is the maturity of the story. Here is a grim and really horrible story. So while the Levite and the old man were enjoying themselves, maybe even the servant and the concubine, maybe they were all really enjoying themselves there in the house. And the men of the city come and they surround the house and they start pounding on the door. And they're called a perverse lot. This is a term that is only used, and it's only used through all of Scripture. It's found probably about 8 or 9 times in our Hebrew text, and every time this perverse lot or this perverse and description, the perverse description is used on somebody or a group of people or is used, it always has sexual connotations, that they're doing something that is sexually wrong, sexually vile. Well, they demand that the old man bring his guest, this Levite, out so that they can. And the word that's used here, and I use the word no. My actual translation has the word intercourse. Others have similar words. The word no in the Hebrew text is yada, which means to know, and that is the same word that was used. Adam knew his wife, Adam yada, his wife, and so forth. And every time that word is used, to know someone is yada. And what it truly means is that intimate sexual knowledge. It does not have to be a good intimate sexual knowledge, but it does mean sexual knowledge of the person, having intercourse with them. What we do need to recognize too is the Hebrew Bible, the Jewish Bible, does not view this as a sexual act, as more a dominance act. This is an act of dominance over somebody else, not a actual. It isn't for the pleasure of the abuser, as we all know that. As we know our modern science, our modern psychological science tells us that a rapist isn't out for the sexual pleasure; it's out for the domination of the other person, male or female. It is irrelevant. In this instance here, that the rape of the daughter of the concubine, the wanton desire to rape this man, has nothing to do with sex or homosexuality. Has everything to do with dominating the person, and that is true of a rapist in our day to day. It has nothing to do with the sexual act itself. It has everything to do with domination and creating a painful event or a horrible event. And so that's the motivation here isn't the sex. The motivation is the dominance. So we need to recognize that. That's how the Jewish view. That's the Jewish Bible. That's what the Tanakh, their study views it. And if somebody wants to turn that into something else, I'm going to tell you that they're wrong. That's not what this is. It has nothing to do with homosexuality. It has everything to do with dominance. Dominance, again, against which is the opposite of what they're offering here, is the opposite of hospitality. This is violence they're offering, not hospitality. And again, I want you to recognize that. Well, the master of the house, and he goes out there and he tries to stop this. And he says to them, no, my brothers, don't do this wicked thing. Don't act so wickedly. And again, the language here is sexually intoned. The word that's used here, wickedly, don't act so wickedly, is again is tied to other acts of violence against people that were in a sexual way, or sex in a way that is incompatible with the love, the desire that is the love that is supposed to be there with this act. Instead, it is more of a ritual act. Wickedness in sexuality, in like temple prostitution, things like that. That's where this word is used. And again, so we need to see that the sexuality of the story and the dominance in the story is what is prevalent. He goes on, since this man is my guest, do not do this vile thing. And again, the third word here is vile, and again it has the sexual overtones that this thing has, is vile in its, because it is a sexual act in this, and so that they're doing. So it's the same, again, don't do this vile thing. Well, of course, their intent is dominance over this man, so they're not listening to him, to the old man. And the old man even offers up his virgin daughter and the concubine. The old man didn't have the right to offer up the concubine, except the Levite had already indicated that he was the master of this house, that the old man was the master of the house, and that while the Levite was staying there, his servant, the Levite's servant, and the Levite's concubine are the servants of the master, the old man of the house. The Levite grabs his concubine, the woman that he traveled all the way from northern part of Ephraim, the hill country of Ephraim, all the way down to Bethlehem to get out of affection for her, trying to win her back. Here now he throws her out. He grabs a hold of her and he throws her out. This is the first time that we've used the word grabbed a hold. He seized her and throws her out there. The same word is used again in the next section, and I'll talk about it when I get to it, but this is a physical act of grabbing a hold, seizing her, grabbing a hold of her, and he tosses her out to these people out there, these men out there in the village. Well, they take that woman, that concubine, and they rape her all night. They abuse her all night long, all the way until morning. And as dawn approaches, they let the woman go, and she manages to get to the door of the old man's house, and that's where she falls. And that's where she stays until the morning comes. I'm telling you, this is a grim story. Picking up with, but the thing about it is it's supposed to be grim. We are supposed to see the horror in this story. We are supposed to see that horror. We are supposed to be appalled by what we hear in this story. That is the intent of the author. It is to appall us. It is to make us cringe in our seats. It is to make us angry at what we are hearing and what we are seeing in this story. It is intended to make us angry. That's the author's intent, is to make us see the horror of all of this. Picking up now with verse 27. In the morning her master got up, opened the doors of the house, and when he went out to go on his way, there was his concubine lying at the door of the house, with her hands on the threshold. Get up, he said to her, we are going. But there was no answer. Then he put her on the donkey, and the man set out for his home. When he had entered his house, he took a knife, and grasping his concubine, he cut her into 12 pieces, limb by limb, and sent her throughout all the territory of Israel. Then he commanded the men whom he sent, saying, Thus shall you say to all the Israelites, Has such a thing ever happened since the day that the Israelites came up out of the land of Egypt until this day? Consider it, take counsel, and speak out. So the Levite gets up in the morning and he goes and he opens the door and he starts to step out. And as he starts to step out on his way, he sees the concubine there lying at the door with her hand on the threshold. That is important. It means that she had the strength to get to the door, to the threshold, which is the baseboard and the side door, and on the sides, that's the threshold. This is the place where a good Jew would place the little item that you touch as you come into the house, the house blessing. As she got to that place where that mark is supposed to be, is where she's lying. They did not hear her. They didn't listen. Maybe they weren't even listening for her as she tries to get back into safety of the house. As he steps out, we see a tonelessness in this. For a man who came all the way there to try to get her affection, now he is toneless. He has no affection left in his voice. All we hear is, "Get up. We are going." There's no empathy, no compassion, no caring in that voice. Well, she doesn't answer. The scripture doesn't tell us, the passage here doesn't tell us whether she's alive or she's dead. It doesn't tell us. All it tells us is she doesn't answer the question. So he puts her on the donkey like she's a sack of grain. He puts her up on the donkey and he takes her and he heads out for home. Hi, come on in. I have about a paragraph and a half, and just bear with me while I do that. Okay, you guys go ahead and do whatever you're doing, just quietly, please. So he puts her on the donkey like she's a sack of grain, and he heads back home. And he gets home, and he takes her off the donkey, and he takes her into the house. And here is where, again, the same word is used, the grasper. He grabs a hold of her. He seizes his concubine. This is where he actually takes a hold of her again. And he cuts her into 12 pieces, limb by limb. That's, and if you count them up, if you cut it off at every joint on your body, your shoulder, your elbow, your wrist, your ankle, your knee, your hip, you end up with 12 pieces. And you have a torso and a head left over. And that's what he does. He cuts her up into 12 little pieces, and he sends these pieces out with some of the men that are part of his household. And he sends them out and he tells them to alert the alert all the tribes that this horrible thing has happened inside the people of Israel. And nothing like this has ever happened before. Not since they came out of Egypt has anything like this has happened before. And so he tells them to consider this, take counsel on this, and then speak out about this. This story, again, as we saw, it paralleled the story of Sodom and Lot. So we saw where the story connects to the Sodom and Lot story, the inhospitality of the people of Gibeah, how they treated the guest, the Levite, as he arrived there. The other part of this that we need to see, the connection here, where he cuts up this woman to send the body parts out. This again connects to Saul, in that when Saul is challenged by the I can't remember exactly which tribe it was, but he was challenged by one of the Canaanite tribes. And they did an awful thing, and he takes an ox, and he cuts that ox up into 12 pieces, and he sends out those 12 pieces of the ox, telling them this is what's going to happen to those tribes who do not respond, is that all of their livestock is going to be killed. That's not what the Levite is saying, but the Levite is using that same technique that Saul uses in the future. And again, here's where the reflection of the mirror is both looking backwards to Lot and Sodom and looking forward to Saul and David in the future. And so the reflected mirror of both directions is in this story. Next week we will continue this story. We will find out what happens next as the story continues and the tribes break into a civil war. So next week, chapter 20, the civil war between Benjamin and the rest of the tribes. God bless and keep you. Thank you for coming. I'll see you next week. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord. And all God's people said, Amen.